On January the 7th and 8th, 2026, a federal immigration enforcement operation sparked tragedy, outrage, and national scrutiny in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Portland, Oregon. Over 2 days, federal agents opened fire in two U.S. cities, leaving one woman dead, two others wounded, and entire communities asking the same question once again: who is accountable, who is protected, and who decides when lethal force is justified? On Wednesday, January the 7th, in South Minneapolis, an ICE agent shot and killed 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good, a mother of three, during what federal authorities describe as a targeted enforcement operation. Good had just dropped off her youngest child off at school. Federal official quickly claimed the agent acted in self-defense, alleging that Good's vehicle possessed an imminent threat. But bystander video and eyewitness account tell a different story. Footage shows Good turning away from agents, not driving towards them when shots were fired. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey publicly rejected the federal narrative, calling the self-defense claim garbage and demanding ICE to leave the city. Good's family described her as a compassionate, artistic, and peace-oriented, a poet, writer, and caretaker deeply rooted in her community. Vigils and protests followed almost immediately, as residents mourned her death and demanded accountability. The FBI assumed control of the investigation, barring state and local law enforcement from accessing evidence, a move that drew sharp criticism from city and state officials and intensified calls for an independent review. This shooting did not just happen in a vacuum. Renee Good was killed less than a mile from where George Floyd was murdered in 2020. For a Minneapolis resident, that proximity is not geographic, it's emotional and historical. Both deaths were captured on video, both involved disputed official narratives, both reopen unresolved wounds about law enforcement, power, and accountability. For a city still carrying the weight of George Floyd killing, this felt hauntingly familiar. The streets remember. Just 1 day later, on Thursday, January the 8th, federal agents opened fire again, this time in southeast Portland, Oregon, near the Adventist Health Hospital in Hazelwood neighborhood. According to local police and federal statements, U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents were conducted a targeted vehicle stop when they fired on a vehicle, injured a man and a woman. Both were later found with gunshot wounds and transported to local hospitals. Their conditions were initially not publicly confirmed. Federal official claimed that the driver attempted to weaponize the vehicle against the agents, prompting the shots. A narrative local leaders have questioned and demanded a full investigation into. The FBI has taken over the investigation, and Portland police said that they were not directly involved in the initial shooting. Local leaders, including Portland Mayor Keith Wilson and Oregon Governor Tina Kotek, condemned the shooting and called for a halt to federal immigration operations until transparent inquiry is completed. Back-to-back federal shootings in two cities, 2 days apart, have intensified concerns over aggressive immigration enforcement tactics and the expanding use of force by federal agency operating in local communities. And these aren't the only two incidents. Civil liberty groups note a pattern of force being used over several federal enforcement actions in recent months. Civil rights groups warn these actions put ordinary civilians at risk. Critics argue that when federal agents operate with limited local oversight, accountability narrows while power widens, eroding public trust. Protests erupted across the nation in response to these shootings, with thousands reported in cities from New York to Los Angeles, Minneapolis to Portland. Citizens took to the streets demanding accountability, transparency, and an end to aggressive federal enforcement tactics. In Portland specifically, large nighttime protests formed outside the local ICE facility and an ICE building, where demonstrators called for an end to federal operations, though some disturbances led to several arrests. In the same week as Renee Good's death, the Trump administration froze hundreds of millions of dollars in federal child care funding, including approximately $180 million affecting Minnesota. The freeze disproportionately impacts low-income and immigrant families, particularly small American communities, after unverified allegations of fraud at selected daycare centers circulated online. State official and civil rights groups argue the move punishes families and children rather than addressing isolated wrongdoing, and view it as politically motivated. This matters because it mirrors the same pattern we're seeing with these shootings. Freezing essential services, defending lethal force despite contradictory video evidence, doubling down on national media instead of acknowledging uncertainty. In a recent 3 hour interview with the New York Times, Donald Trump repeated claims that Renee Good tried to run over an ICE agent, even as video footage and local officials disputed that account. That gap between official narrative and visible reality is where trust collapses. And look, let's be honest, this doesn't feel accidental. People are genuinely asking, why Minnesota? Like, did somebody tell Trump that there was oil in Minnesota underground or something that we don't know about? Because all these incidents and all these sequence of things happening is wildly crazy. Freeze childcare funding, target immigrant communities, paint an entire Minnesota community as criminal on live television, then shoot a mother of three and call it self defense, while the video with multiple angles that we all saw tell a different story. At some point, it stops feeling like coincidence and it starts feeling like a stress test. How far can we go? And if we stack these events together, aggressive federal enforcement, lethal force against unarmed civilians, funding freezes that hit immigrant families the hardest, official insisting that the public didn't see what they clearly saw. Right. Because we're morons, right? That's not confusion. That's a test of power. These shootings are not isolated incidents. They reflect a broader pattern, one where authority expands, oversight shrinks, and accountability becomes optional. Trust doesn't erode quietly, it fractures. People feel unprotected, unheard, and governed without their consent or participation. Minnesota has lived this before. Portland is watching it happen again. And across the country, many Americans see federal power growing more distant, more forceful, and less answerable. This is the danger point, not chaos, but alienation. A growing sense that social contract is being written without public consent. History tells us what happens when that fracture deepens. These deaths, these policies, and these rhetoric are not random. They are a pattern. They are a warning, and they are a direct challenge to the idea of trust between the government and the people it serves. And that's our coverage of the story, raising serious questions about power, accountability, and trust.